Good morning, everyone. If we could all take a seat, I think we're going to get started here shortly. And I'd encourage those in the back sitting at the lunch tables to come forward and sit in the general seating area. We hope to have a lot of interaction today, so if you could just pull your seat up and join us around the perimeter of the board table, we'd appreciate it. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. We greatly appreciate it. I promise you this will be a very exciting, interesting, and thought-provoking retreat. I think we can all agree that to grow Estes Park in a responsible, sustainable, and competitive way, we all need to be working together. So it's great to see so many of you here today to participate in that, and there'll be many others joining us throughout the afternoon. I shared with all of you in the confirmation emails what the definition of destination product development was, but it's worth repeating as we get started today. Destination product development is a continuous process of coordination and development of amenities, facilities, products, and services that supports a community delivering quality experiences for guests and also enhances residents' well-being. Most of you have also heard me describe destination product development as everything from paddleboards on Lake Estes to the flap grant. The paddleboards on Lake Estes represent how we can look at the current assets we have, the lake, and find ways to utilize them creatively. And the flap grant is an example of a traffic engineering opportunity that will also ignite positive economic growth within our community. But I would like to set the record straight that Schuyler and the Rec District have officially budgeted for paddleboards on Lake Estes, so we're already moving in the right direction. Yay, Schuyler and the Rec District. So if you do see them, please thank Schuyler and his team for having that vision and taking that leap of faith. And I don't think that my board believes me, but I do plan on putting all of you on paddleboards in Lake Estes for a photo op. So be sure to be checking out the local papers, and I fully intend that to be on the front page. Most, if not all of you, took time to complete the annual Visit Estes Park survey, and thank you, by the way. We had more participation with that survey than we have had in history. It's important for you to share your vision with us so we can incorporate your desires as we continue to enhance our community. Over 9 months ago, when Visit Estes Park began discussions about destination product development, the main question around the table was, what is destination product development? And at that point, we knew it would take a good year for the community to not only understand what destination product development is, but also to come up with examples that we can embrace here in our community. Well, shame on me, because based on the Visit Estes Park survey, our community is way ahead. The community did not need a year, after all, to understand destination product development. They not only defined it in our survey, they provided numerous examples of what that meant to them and their community. And most importantly, it was rated the #1 priority that Estes Park needs to focus on as we move this destination forward. Over 53% of our partners listed destination product development first, with a total of 5 options to choose from. How awesome is that? So this destination product development retreat today could not be more timely, and I truly believe we are making history today. I'd like to thank Fall River Productions for partnering with us and videotaping. They'll have a video and audio option for all of us to share within our associations and other partners that could not attend today. They did this very last minute for us, so we do appreciate it, both of you, and please be sure to thank Alex and Brian at some point today. Thanks, guys. All of the materials you'll view today will be sent to you via email, so no need to bog yourself down into taking a lot of notes. Everything will be shared. I'd like to take a few minutes to quickly introduce ourselves, so if we could go around the entire room. We'll start with vote on them here at the board and go along with the board, but also general seating. If you could quickly state your name, your business, and any associations or groups you're affiliated with. Bill?
Bill, last name's Allman, and I'm associated with the YMCA of the Rockies, and I'm chair of the Visit Estes Park Board.
Scott Webermeyer, National Park Village, Visit Estes Park Board.
John Nicholas, Visit Estes Park Board. I'm with the Estes Park Economic Development Corporation and also on the board of Estes Valley Partners for Commerce.
I'm the Estes Park Economic Board, on the Visit Estes Park Board, and on the Lodging Association.
Lynette Locke, Rocky Mountain Resorts, Visit Estes Park Board, and the ELA Board.
Good morning, Adam Shake, Visit Estes Park Board. I'm the president of the Estes Valley Partners for Commerce, and I'm on the board of trustees for the Rocky Mountain Performing Arts Center.
I'm Collins Lewis, and I'm with Visit Estes Park.
Kirby Eagleton, Visit Estes Park, and Estes Valley Partners for Commerce.
Susie Blackhurst, Visit Estes Park.
Brooke Brown, Visit Estes Park.
Norris, Town Trustee.
Bob Holcomb, Town Trustee.
Wendy Coney, Community Hearing Center, and I'm Mayor Pro Tem of Estes Park. Thank you.
Bill Pinkham, Mayor.
John Erickson, Serendipity Trading at Estes Park Self-Storage, town trustee and member of the branding committee that BPP worked on several years ago.
My name is Greg Mahorn. I'm the Director of Public Works for the town.
Bill Winslow, Director of Community Services for the town.
I'm Karen Hamill, and I'm with the Town of Estes Park Food Sales and Estes Park Wedding Association.
David Beatty, Economic Development Corporation committees.
Gerald Mail, I'm with Estes Park SEO. I'm also on the EDC board, and a member of the famous broadband.
Ken Smith, and I'm the Vice President of the VBBC, and I'm on the EDC board, and I'm Smith Science Studio, and I generally meddle in lots of them.
I'm Jim Pickering. It says town historian, but thank you very much. EDC Executive Committee.
Tom Wodowski, Harris Real Estate. I'm on the EDC board and also on the Transportation Advisory Board for the town.
Brian Hillwig, I'm the CEO of York Hospital. I sit on the EDC board and also on the Estes Valley Park.
Tina Harlow, I'm with the Stanley Hotel, Corporate Director of Communications for Grand Heritage. I'm on the EDC board and work on the committee for Estes Arts Presents.
Diane Muno, Estes Valley Partners for Commerce, Estes Park Medical Center Foundation, and Rocky Mountain Performing Arts Center, and I have the Spruce House name.
Ken Arnold, Deercrest, and ELA board.
Joyce Paxton, member of the Estes Park Women's Club, and an ambassador to the town visitor center.
Michael Moon, EDC broadband committee, and Estes Park.
Catherine Moon, Police Auxiliary, and Target Women's Club.
Betty Harrison, Realtor, Mountain Valley Real Estate, also Vacation Home Rental Association.
I'm Ed Peterson, Mountain Valley Real Estate, and also part of the Estes Vacation Rental Association.
Charlie Dickey, Estes Valley Partners for Commerce Board and Downtown Business Partners, also Western Mountain Sun and Business Consulting.
Joe Biles, Photography, and ShootMyHike.com.
Jeff Sindelar, Rocky Biz, Colorado franchisee, and
Stormy Owens, Aspenbrook Vacation Homes, and part-time Rocky Mountain Resorts.
I'm Jen Brown. I'm with the Rocky Mountain Park Inn.
Heidi Scanlon, Estes Park Condos,
David Parsons, Estes Park Trail Gazette.
Did we get everybody? Go ahead, Steve. Okay.
Kaylin Kruger, Salton County.
Val Morris, president of the Estes Park Running Club, also director for the Estes Park Marathon. I'm a member of the Transportation Advisory Board, middle school track coach. Bill Smith, I'm outside of the involved in the county, and I'm in the restaurant group and the
Great. Did we get everyone? Thank you. And to finish off, for those that don't know me, I'm Elizabeth Fogarty, President and CEO of Visit Estes Park. It's been 9 months now, so almost a year. It's been an honor and a privilege leading this community with our very dedicated and talented staff. Thanks, everybody, and our entire board. I'm also Vice President of the Estes Area Lodging Association, sit on the executive committee for the EDC board as well. I'll now introduce Mitch with a short bio, just to refresh your memory. Mitch Nichols is president of Nichols Tourism Group and leads the strategic planning and product development activities of the firm. Mr. Nichols' expertise is focused on the study of a destination's underlying economic factors, the impacts of changing market conditions, and the resulting implications to product and destination performance. He has directed and overseen a wide range of destination planning efforts ranging from Alaska to Mexico. In all instances, the challenge is similar. How do destinations or projects strategically prioritize their opportunities in ways that maximize their competitive position? Perfect, right? Mitch's firm prides itself on developing strategies that are embraced on an industry-wide basis and are truly implementable. Very important. Mitch's experience ranges from broad strategy planning efforts in beach destinations to unique mountain destinations such as Mount Hood region in Oregon and Asheville, North Carolina, and Estes Park, Colorado.
There you go.
Recognizing the critical role proactive product development plays in successful destination attraction, Mitch is often involved in analyzing and recommending project-specific components in large-scale mixed-use developments. He has served as the primary consultant to the U.S. Forest Service and Park Service, analyzing the demand potential and prospective impacts of a $600 million mixed-use resort development planned as the gateway to Grand Canyon National Park. Mitch works closely with Temple University and their National Laboratory of Tourism and E-Commerce in applying cutting-edge international research to real-world challenges, and is an instructor with Purdue University and their Destination Management Certification Program. I can barely contain my excitement to be hosting such an accomplished and seasoned professional in the destination product development arena. Estes Park, please join me in welcoming Mitch Nichols.
Well, great. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, good. I think rather than the podium, I'm going to move around a little bit as we go through the morning. But boy, what a fantastic venue to be able to take the time today. And boy, I was really impressed with what Elizabeth has done with convening this diversity of heads, backgrounds, perspectives. I think it really should be very valuable as we go through the day. And frankly, while I'll be giving some of my perspectives and insights, we're also going to be weighing in pretty heavily on you to share some of your thoughts and ideas and perspectives. So really be sort of a give and take type of process as we go through the day. Let me start and just talk a little bit about how I see the day progressing. We're going to start, I'll just expand a little bit on Elizabeth's introduction, talk a little bit more about our firm and some of our background in strategic planning for destinations and tourism product development. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about a pretty fundamental question. You know, why are we even thinking about proactive tourism product development? You know, Elizabeth talked about you guys getting this ball rolling about 9 months ago. There's a lot of other destinations exactly in the same boat that you're in. You know, what is it? Should we really be even getting in this space? How do we go about that? So we'll take a little bit of time trying to lay that as a foundation. Then really importantly, we'll spend some time talking about how do we lay a little bit of foundation before we start talking about what products or what opportunities or what festivals or experiences or events. It's what are we really trying to achieve? What are the critical issues that are facing Estes Park? What are some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? What are those kinds of factors that when we're thinking about new opportunities that we can speak to, here's why we think this product is something that we should be focusing on. It really addresses issue 1, issue 5, issue 7. So we'll talk a little bit about some of these key issues and really get you to weigh in from your perspective on what some of those key factors that we need to be keeping top of mind is. We'll finish up the morning talking about a few examples of how some other destinations around the country have tackled this issue, how they've structured some things, some of the projects that they've been able to move forward, some at both a smaller city level and also in some instances where a state has actually been an important ally, an important partner in moving this kind of thinking forward. We'll take a break and have some lunch, and then we'll get back together after lunch, and that's where we'll really get you guys to roll up your sleeves and start thinking proactively in terms of what are some of those opportunities. We'll start the afternoon off talking about sort of framing. What do I see as some of the important factors as you guys start talking about some of these ideas, some of these concepts? What do we need to be thinking about in terms of key factors or key criteria when we're having that discussion? Then we're going to break the groups into a variety of smaller breakout groups and have you start that dialogue. What are some of the opportunities you see? Why do you see them as rising to the top of the heap? Then we'll get the groups back together. We'll have each of the group sort of report back to the larger group so we all get the benefit of the different thoughts and perspectives that we have in the room. And then we'll end up the day talking about next steps with some of the foundation that's been laid in this day-long session. How do we start thinking about what are some of the next areas, the next items that we might think? So pretty full day, but I think it's, as Elizabeth noted, really encouraging to see this kind of engagement, this kind of thought process. So I think we're in for an interesting day. A couple of points here. Since we've got the whole day, I would suggest if you've got thoughts, comments, questions, let's go ahead and pose that as we're going through the materials, not try and save it to an end of a session or whatever. So go ahead. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we'll be getting these slides and these materials out to you so you won't have to be worrying about taking notes as we're going through, as it at least relates to the slides. So with that sort of summary as far as the day, let me jump right into it and talk a little bit about our group, Nichols Tourism Group. My background, business focus, my education was marketing, market research, undergraduate, MBA. Went to work with a regional economic firm. We did a lot of real estate development and feasibility and planning. Went on with the accounting firms of Laventhal and Horvath, Coopers and Librant, and I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of market studies and feasibility studies around the development game. And then the second half of my career has really focused on tourism, destinations, and strategic planning. Sometimes at a state level with a great state like Alaska, sometimes a beach destination like Sarasota that combines great art and cultural elements with amazing white sand beaches. Sometimes, Elizabeth noted, we worked with the Park Service at the Grand Canyon for, gosh, this was 5-6 years on a large gateway project that at the end of the day never did come into being, but it was a very significant project. I'm working currently with the National Park in the Indiana Dunes, that's at the tip of Lake Michigan, and a great national lakeshore there. You know, similar to Estes Park, a great destination, Sedona, with the red rocks and the great attributes, whether it's wine, whether it's heritage, with a historic triangle of Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown. And Elizabeth noted this in the initial brief introduction. Well, great diversity in terms of geographic area, in terms of thematic areas. They all were faced with the same challenge that you've got. The issue is, how do we maximize the potential of the visitor industry for Estes Park, its economy? And frankly, what we're seeing is just this increasingly competitive game. More and more destinations are seeing that as a pretty strong bullseye. And so the issue is, how do we proactively and strategically prioritize opportunities? And in many instances, with these clients over the last 20 years, the products, the experiences, the engagement that they're able to offer up to the guest is a very important part of that whole strategy process. So, lots of background and experience all around the country. We were based in Phoenix for the last 20 years, and my wife and I just recently moved up to Washington State, so I'm having a little bit of a change in scenery and an environment. But as I say, work around the country. One of the things I also do, I teach the product development course for Destination Marketing Association International. Some of you may be familiar with DMEI. DMEI is the trade association for DMOs, Destination Marketing Management Organizations, CDBs. They're the largest in the country, in the world, essentially, as far as the trade association. And they've got an executive certification course, and I teach the destination or the product development course within that program. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but the interesting thing is, you are not unlike a lot of other destinations where this is, again, a relatively new thing. The course itself has only been taught by DMEI for less than 10 years. But DMEI recognized it was just critically important. It can't just be a marketing game. We have to be thinking about how our organizations proactively think about the products, the experiences, how they're engaging the visitor, and incorporated that within their certification program. DMEI has spent the last couple of years also thinking from a forward-looking context. What does the future hold for destinations and for organizations representing those destinations? And they developed a program and a white paper, Destination Next. And what's really interesting in that white paper and the tactical steps that they outline is how much of them really relate about the products, the experiences, the offerings that the destination has, and really has product development all integrated within it. So I think increasingly we're recognizing that we've got to be front and center in this game, and increasingly that whole point of proactive product development is becoming increasingly recognized as a critical element. So with that introduction, let me sort of transition into a pretty fundamental question. Yes, sir.
Is the Destination Next white paper available on the web?
It is, and I think, Elizabeth, you'd be able to get that. Before I move on from that point, you are a member of DMEI, and you've received their accreditation. And I've just mentioned this to a couple of folks in the room. We work around the country, and sometimes I don't think the broader audiences recognize how unique that certification for your DMO is. There's less than 20% of the CDBs around the country that have been able to provide the documentation and the certification process to get that accreditation. So you should tip your hat to the organization for getting that accreditation. 80% of like organizations around the country can't say that. So that should be available, and Elizabeth should be able to get her hands on that. So this whole question of why proactive product development, some of you in the room might be asking that question. Why are we even getting in this game? I mentioned that I've been working with destinations for 20 plus years, and going back not that long ago, a lot operated with how I would sort of characterize it as a traditional tourism approach, where the destinations, and I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, DMO, a destination marketing or management organization, and a CVB, but those kinds of DMO organizations would oftentimes take their product as a given, and they would see their mission, they'd see their role as a marketing role. It's all about who and how do we sell those products. But we'll let someone else figure out what the next product is and how that's going to be developed and evolved. And frankly, there's still quite a number of destinations that still operate under that kind of an approach. But increasingly, we're seeing those ones that are taking more of a strategic approach of starting, and this is a pretty fundamental business kind of context, but we start with our customer first. We start saying, who is that target customer? Who is the high value segments for Estes Park? How important are the younger generations? How important is transitioning that day visitor into the overnight visitor? How important is bringing in that off or shoulder season visitor? So really thinking much more proactively on those target customer segments, those high value segments. And then it's all about how do we develop, how do we craft, how do we mold our product in ways that speak to those target customer segments. It makes a lot of sense, and most businesses try and operate more from that kind of foundation. But as I say, there's still lots of destinations that still embrace and are working more on this more traditional type of approach. Another way to sort of characterize it is to say that they're remaining in more of a reactive mode. They'll wait until a product is proposed, a festival, an event, and they'll react to that specific concept. And they don't go into a process of saying, what are our other alternatives? What other opportunities do we have? And is this the right one for us to be rising up and committing resources, time, energies, and efforts? Where we really need to be moving towards is a much more proactive kind of orientation. And this is, we started this effort, we'll be going into this more as the day progresses, but we start thinking about what are the range of various product development concepts that we could be considering. And very importantly, and even just some of the brief conversations I've had before we got started, we were talking about, are there products that could really differentiate Estes Park from Colorado competitive destination 1, 2, 3. So it's not just a me too, where it's nice to have this, but so do 4 other of our key competitive set, and it's really not setting us apart. Are there products that are really sustainable over a longer period of time? So it's not just a weekend or a 6-month or a 1 year, but that product that really has that longevity and can be implemented in a sustainable way over a long period of time. In a lot of instances, a destination can have lots of existing assets, and with the introduction of the right new product, it can leverage, it can be synergistic to some of those existing needs, and have those operate and perform at a whole heightened kind of level. And very importantly, what we can find is there's oftentimes a sweet spot where the right kind of tourism product development can resonate and speak to an external visitor, but it can also speak to community needs and resident quality of life kinds of elements. And so if we're going through that process, and there's this much more proactive kind of stance, we can think about that range of opportunities. And from a logic standpoint, from a well thought out business kind of context, which ones bubble up to the top? And not just wait for them to find us, that we can come out like other, you guys, the economic development, you've been doing this forever, but it's who are the right guys, who do we need to get in front of, and how do we tell that Estes Park story? So getting out of the reactive mode, get into this more proactive recruitment kind of mode. I want to revisit, Elizabeth read her definition, and frankly, I think it's a good definition. Tourism product development is a continuous process of coordination and development of amenities, facilities, products, and services that supports a community, delivering quality experiences for guests, as well as enhancing residents' well-being. And let me just ask you to focus on that last sentence or two, because I think it's really important that we're recognizing there's an opportunity for us to add new experiences and products and engagements that resonate not just, again, with that external visitor, but can also be a great enhancement for our own residents and add to the quality of life and the day-to-day experience and why they choose Estes Park as the location to call home. So I really like that when Elizabeth had this definition, she had this where it's both that external guest as well as enhancing residents' well-being. Let me throw out a term to, again, sort of expand what do we mean when we're talking about product development. In the course, when we teach with DMAI, I use the term, think of yourself as a destination architect. And I think that's a really great way to sort of frame it, where the architect isn't the group who builds the product or finances the product, but they're the ones who are thinking about what are the different pieces that really work together, that if we could mix this with this and puts those elements together. And that's really what we're looking for, this kind of a group, these kinds of heads, to really be thinking of themselves as the destination architect and thinking through, again, where are our critical issues and strengths and weaknesses, and if we had this and we could link this element with that element, this could be synergistic in a variety of different ways. So thinking not just about definitions, but also using terms like a destination architect. This chart is a little busy, but I think many of you who have had a business background, very familiar. Product life cycle is a sort of 101 in any business class. But too often we're not thinking of that type of life cycle for our own destinations. And so I want to take just a minute or two and go through some of this. But you know, a typical destinations and a product starts out in the exploration stages, few visitors, minimal tourism infrastructure. I need to stay away a little bit from that speaker. And you know, things start to take off. There's an evolvement stage where visitation increases, there's some local tourism investment, and then things really get active. And there's a strong growth curve, rapid growth, more built attractions, you're securing outside investment. But then growth starts to slow in the consolidation stage with the slower visitation growth. And a lot of the focus is on seasonality. How do we build shoulder and off-season periods? And then we move into a flatten, a stagnation type of stage. And then the question is, do we move into a declining stage, or are we reinventing? Are we refreshing? Are we re-engaging and moving into a rejuvenation type of orientation? And I got to tell you, in my experience, too often, when I'm sitting with a group like this, they've waited too long, and they're in this decline stage, and the wheels are coming off, and that's when the group and the community comes together and starts having these kinds of discussions. So it's very important to really think about where is Estes Park? Where are we on this type of product life cycle? And is there a consensus of opinions of where we're at and what implications that has? So let me just throw that out to you for a minute. What's your perspective when you see and you think about this life cycle? Where would you put Estes Park? Yeah, Mayor.
I think there's a comparable graph to go along with that, which indicates what's occurred during that period of time, the various factors that have influenced, in our case.
Mayor, can I get you to wait for just 1 second? I think What we're going to do is ask, we'll use the microphone so everyone can pick up the comments and the thoughts.
I think there's a comparable graph that goes along with this, which starts with, at some point in time in Estes Park, the things that influence the growth in our community, the various factors, and you can go through those, and it follows the exact curve that you're showing there, which you reach a point where does the curve begin to drop off, or what are the factors that are out in the marketplace that are going to help to elevate that. So it's understanding both curves that I think enables you to influence your growth and future.
I think that's a good point, and oftentimes in a broader strategic planning session, we go through that kind of exercise of what were the factors. Was this a 1960 to 72? Was this and really sort of carving that out a little bit more directly. Obviously, don't have the time here this morning, but I think the bigger issue is just sort of thinking along that curve, and generally, where would we see?
Yes, Wendy Koenig. I'm wondering if you can't get different answers based on your business.
You bring up a very good point, and there's individual positions on the life cycle for individual products, and then what we're really sort of focusing on right here is if we try and sort of bundle and think of Estes Park as a collective destination, can we say, but you're certainly right, it's a combination of all of the individual products, and the park is at a very different position than a conference center.
Do you work to put everybody on the same point on the ground? Is that even practical to do?
It's not, but I do think that in terms of thinking through the broader destination, and in general, how are we perceived from that external visitor? This is helpful in terms of thinking generally, where are we as a collective destination in terms of that maturation process.
Yeah, Ron Norris, we're playing catch up on a lot of our infrastructure now with roads and water piping and water treatment and traffic flow and parking. The good news is we've recognized that, and we've got a lot of people working on that. Our tourism has been fairly flat. I don't think it's declined. But we certainly need to continue putting a lot of effort into our infrastructure over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, the infrastructure is a critical element, and I think I throw this chart up more just to sort of stimulate the thinking, and again, the thoughts of different products having different positions, and we can call out certain years if we look more closely. But I think the general point is oftentimes, we might be on this flattening stage, and now I think is very much the appropriate time to be undertaking this kind of activity or initiative before you're moving into that declining type of stage. So if we're saying why product development, and we're saying we need to move, here's a definition, thinking of ourselves as destination architects, I want to challenge you. Too often when we talk about tourism product development, the focus goes to the top of this pyramid, that what we're talking about is creating something new. And sometimes that is the right answer, and it's some significant new project that is introduced within a community. Sometimes the challenge with that create part of the development pyramid is it can take significant dollars and resources, and can sometimes be an inhibiting factor. Oftentimes, what gets too often overlooked is recognizing the existing resources that are already present in a destination, and if we link and integrate those products in new and different meaningful kinds of ways, they can have a much more collective power and operate at a whole different kind of level. So linking the existing products in new and different kinds of ways can often be a way from tourism product development that a destination can undertake early stage, rapid development and evolution in this game. Also, too often, we allow some of our existing products that are a little long in the tooth, that haven't been refreshed, to continue that life cycle stage that we talked about, and we're not working with them to enhance them, to bring new thinking, new approaches, particularly recognizing the changing expectations of today's visitors. So oftentimes, rather than building and committing the resources to a brand new product, we can have significant power and opportunities in enhancing some of our existing products. So we need to think, create, link, and enhance. And let me just expand on those and just give a quick example in each one of those areas. I work quite a bit with the city of Scottsdale, and we did some of the long-range strategic planning for them. Great destination. But one of the really interesting things was Scottsdale as a destination was losing much of its Western heritage and its Western history. It was almost a victim of its own success. Fantastic resorts, fantastic golf, fantastic spas, but that had overshadowed all of this great history and what made Scottsdale so special. And so the issue is, how do we regain that? How do we serve that up to our external external visitors, to our internal residents? They also had an arts district that in earlier years, the art district had been a really powerful part of Scottsdale. But as more of the art sales were taking place on the internet, many of the galleries were having very difficult times, and the art district was seeing declining trends. So they positioned the new Scottsdale Museum of the West in the downtown area next to the art districts, being able to address this Western identity, be an important catalyst to revitalizing the arts district, and really importantly, Scottsdale was the beneficiary of lots of new residents, like much of Arizona. But too many of those residents didn't really have that understanding of the history and heritage. So this concept had been on the drawing board for more than 20 years, 15, 20 years. And so we've worked with Scottsdale. They've got a tourism development commission. And with some of the resources from that commission, this is finally moving forward. It's about to open here very shortly. So a very important asset that when we talk about what are strategic critical issues, what are factors, is the new product. So it's not just another product that could get 80,000 visitors or 200,000 visitors. It's really serving multiple goals and multiple needs. And very importantly, if Scottsdale didn't have that type of tourism development commission, having some of the resources, it's very likely that we'd be looking at this another 10 years, another 15 years, and it still would have just been a concept that gets dusted off every 5-7 years and never comes to fruition. So in this instance, in Scottsdale, it was all about creating and getting some of the larger dollars to fund the new structure. I mentioned I worked in Indiana Dunes. It's at the lakeshore of Lake Michigan there, and very similar to you guys with the National Lakeshore, 3 million visits a year at their front door. And not unlike you guys, the challenge was too many of those visitors were experiencing the lakeshore as a day visitor. They were coming out of Chicago, they were coming out of Indy, having a great day at the beach, putting the kids back in the car and heading back home, and really weren't getting the power of that visitor market. So it was all about, how do we take advantage of this major anchor that's at our front door and do more? And what became evident there is that they had this huge range of fantastic natural elements dispersed throughout the county. But none of these were interpreted, none of them had any marketing dollars, none of them were brought together. So it was all about, how do we use the lakeshore as the anchor? We get them here, and then we cross-sell them through a Beyond the Beach discovery trail. So it was all about linking these existing assets, interpreting them at a whole new level, developing websites, developing storylines behind this, and bringing that up to a whole new level. Much less cost in terms of, it's not a sticks and bricks. There was signage, there was website development, there was interpretation, but a much more financially achievable goal. That has grown. In just a 4-year period, it's the third most active product for this destination now. So it's the power of thinking about linking and integrating existing assets in new and more powerful kinds of ways. Sometimes it's enhance. Sedona, much as some of the discussions that you've had, they said, how do we expand our arts and cultural environment as part of an experience? They built an amazing cultural park with the Red Rocks as the backdrop, and beautiful facility, but within 3 years, the venue went bankrupt. And it's now sat for more than a decade fallow. And now working with Tourism Product Development Committee in Sedona, we're working to say reuse strategies and how do we get this amazing assets? How do we enhance this? How do we get this as a positive contributing asset back within the Sedona community together? So again, sometimes create, sometimes link, sometimes enhance, but very importantly, as we're talking about new opportunities, that we're thinking about all of those. What about existing assets? Could we link them in new and different kinds of ways? Or are there products that we could enhance and bring them up to a new, are there new opportunities to create a new product? But again, create, link, and enhance, all very important. So I started this off of why product development, and I think as you go through some of the rationale, most people can get to the point where it makes sense, we need to be in this space. But there's some good reasons why a lot of the organizations have held off. In a lot of instances, these organizations have started primarily as marketing organizations, and they don't have the technical skill sets that are required. No one has a planning background or a finance background within the organizations. Now that's changing, and some of these are actually bringing in those kinds of skill sets within their organizations. A very big challenge with product development is that it really requires integration of a lot of different entities, many of which a DMO doesn't have any direct control over. There's the developer, there's the bank, there's the zoning issue, and so they're trying to coordinate a lot of different pieces that go far beyond saying, what's our creative and what are the pubs that we're going to be using in next year's campaign. We've talked a little bit about this. This is the important one. Sometimes as an organization starts developing a set of tools and resources and actively trying to recruit or develop new products, there can be some potential conflicts with existing operators. And the whole issue of, you're giving these guys a competitive advantage, and if it's really seen as not really attracting a new segment, not really introducing a new component, some of those existing businesses can get concerned. Well, I can't tell you the number of organizations where the executive director is saying, gosh, I'm already strained with my staff and my resources, and you wanted me to take on what? And that can be a really important constraint. It's also an area where performance and success can be difficult to track. Some of these efforts and initiatives can take multiple years to ultimately see, and so tracking and evaluating success can be difficult. And the capital needs is also a factor that can inhibit positive and progressive movement on that. So I think it's important that we don't go into this Pollyannish, and we understand that this is not an easy road to go down. But I think, as I sort of started with my initial comments, that it just is too important a space for us not to be at the table and taking a proactive, and even with some of the challenges, we've got to take the kinds of steps that you're taking, that you've been taking here for the last 9 months. So with that sort of summary, why tourism product development, before I go in and start talking about some of the planning process and how we start thinking about some of the critical factors, Any thoughts or comments as it relates?
Thank you. In the three examples that you gave, they almost looked like more the traditional approach, which is you were looking at assets or creating assets. But you didn't describe the customer focus. And one of the things that could be an inhibiting factor is what are the customer expectations? What are the visitor expectations? And if we don't know that, then we can't take a strategic approach as you're describing it. And that seems like the dramatic change in perspective that you're really proposing. I'm wondering if you could address that.
Yeah, and it didn't get into that level of detail, but let me take the Indiana Dunes for an example. It very much was targeted to a targeted customer segments. It was all about that longer stay. It's not focused on that day visitor. It's that higher quality, higher spending, cultural and nature-based enthusiast that we could lure with the lakeshore, and then with this mix of other. So it's not just, frankly, the visitor who's getting the kids and going to McDonald's and heading back to Chicago. And so there were thematic orientations, there were income orientations, there were length of stay orientations that were very different from much of the existing visitor base that was targeted. And the goal was that we could work to attract this higher value, this higher educated, and this longer staying guest with the Discovery Trail.
And there was a demand for that.
There was, and frankly, that nature-based, and particularly with the huge urban areas of Chicago and Indianapolis, the ability to say we've got this, and it's not unlike some of the storylines you have as far as this great relaxing outdoor recreation, nature-based environment. They're one of the closest ones to these huge urban areas. But you raise a very important point, and it really gets back to that one of those earlier slides that I talked about, starting with who are those targeted customer segments, and how do we craft the products in a way that are going to speak to those. So it's good that you're reinforcing that point, that you've got to make sure that that's staying sort of front and center as those new products or ideas develop.
And we continue to do visitor study research. We completed one formally with Scott Hanna a few years back, but we're continuing to ask those questions ongoing, certainly through our events data. We ask people why they came, what they like about Estes Park, any constructive criticism they have for Estes, and what they would like to see in Estes that currently isn't here. So we're constantly capturing that data and finding new and innovative ways to ask our guests those questions. We'll be asking those questions at the Visitor Center when we put in the touchscreens as well. And we're hoping to work with the hotels and other area businesses to be able to ask our guests these questions and be able to capture it all into one system.
Well, my take is, just from the turnout in the room, with the results of the partner study that Elizabeth was mentioning, that to a large degree you've answered that question, why product development, and most of the community recognizes that we need to be in this space and we need to be moving along that avenue. And so the issue then becomes, how do we start formulating somewhat of a framework in terms of better understanding what are the right products? Which one should we be prioritizing? And so we want to take some time now and talk about laying that foundation. And I think it's very important, and sort of gets back to your earlier point of taking a hard look at our current products. Where are we at? What are the ones that are really driving visitation? What's the power? Are we gaining? Are we sort of flat? Or are we declining? So really starting by taking a hard look at that internal products, and where are we at with those existing internal products. As we get a better understanding of where we stand with that current inventory, then we need to start thinking about what are some of the critical issues facing the community. sometimes overused, but SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And what are some of the strategic implications those have to new product development ideas or concepts? As we understand that internal product makeup, as we understand some of the critical issues, then we can start, and only then should we be starting to talk about new products, new ideas, because if we're swatting around and thinking about new concepts and new ideas before we've done some of this foundation work, it's very hard to say, here's a strong rationale of why this one has raised to the top of the heap. And then finally, as some of these opportunities start to get gel and get identified, then we need to think about the formation and the structure of an organization that can keep that momentum going, that can coordinate future efforts and keep activity moving forward. So what I want to do is take some time here this morning and start getting some thoughts from the group in terms of this internal product assessment. What are some of the key products that Estes Park currently has? Where are we at? Are we moving up? Are we stagnant? Are we declining? And then we'll go on and talk about some of these SWOT factors and strategic implications as the morning progresses. But to sort of frame this product discussion, let me suggest that we think of products as not all created as equal, and that there's some products that are truly destination drivers. They're the products that are critical in stimulating the fundamental travel decision. When a family is trying to decide, is it Estes Park? Is it some other Colorado destination? Is it a Utah alternative? It's the products that really resonate, that are really the most powerful ones that are really driving that fundamental travel decision for Estes Park. Then there's a range of driver accelerants. And these are products that don't rise to the same power, but they are important elements that help cement the decision that Estes Park is the one that we're going to choose above the other alternatives. And then there's this whole host of dependent amenities. We refer to them as, and they're nice products, and a lot of the visitors will partake of those products when they're in the destination, but they really play very little role in driving that fundamental travel decision. And too often what we find is that a community will spend, frankly, a lot of time, a lot of energies and resources, and at the end of the day, all they've really done is developed one more dependent amenity. And so we really need to be thinking about what are our current drivers, what are our current accelerants, and as we're talking about new ideas and new concepts, could they actually act as a driver or hopefully as an accelerant, and ensure that we're not just developing a concept that has appeal, but in reality it really doesn't have that power to really stimulate that fundamental travel decision. So with that sort of setup, let me ask you, what do you see as the drivers?
So are driver decelerants important to consider as well, or just accelerants?
I haven't used the term decelerants, but that's certainly, and that's more in the sort of the critical issues and the weaknesses. And if do you have something in mind particularly when you talk about decelerant?
Well, we have a beautiful location, but traffic in the summer is a decelerant.
Yeah.
Last summer, I remember looking out toward down 36, and traffic was backed up all the way down to some as far as I could see.
Sure.
So I could see people saying, I mean, if you're caught in that, you're saying, let's go up to Rocky Mountain National Park or whatever it happens to be. But if you remember being caught in traffic for a couple of hours, that's a decelerant.
Let me ask you to hold those thoughts, because that's going to be the next area that we go in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, sort of critical issues. And so first here, we'll focus on, from the product standpoint, what are the most powerful products, and then we'll get into what you raised, which is an extremely important part of the discussion and dialogue.
Just a couple of comments I'd like to make, going back to some of your previous slides.
Yeah.
This community is definitely on the uptick. We are not on the downtick. We have become much more proactive over the last couple of years on a number of scenes, and that's important. In terms of destination drivers, the current project that is on a lot of minds here, forgetting about transportation for the moment, is the health and wellness opportunity, which benefits our citizens and will bring more people here. And that's just one of the ideas that is in process in terms of accelerating bringing people here, which then ends up benefiting us because we're going to be getting more sales tax and other revenues, as well as provide for a great experience for the visitors. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's a great future project, and one that I think we want to talk about more as the day progresses. Let me try and focus the discussion, though, on the current assets, and I would think just about everyone would talk about the park as being the most significant destination driver for Estes Park. But are there other drivers that are currently, in addition to the park, sort of critical destination drivers for the destination?
Well, you stole my message.
Oh, okay.
But I think the proof of the importance of the national park is that when the national park shut down, the whole downtown of Estes Park shut down. We just didn't have anybody coming here. It served as almost a deterrent. So when it opened up, people came back. So it is the elephant in the room, but it's a good elephant.
And Mayor, if I ask you in terms of a driver, and do you see that gaining, flat?
It's definitely gaining, and I think the park does visitor count. We have a number of factors that enter into it. Obviously, weather has a significant impact,
sure.
And we can see the effect of that in our sales tax revenues and the visitor count and all that. But there are obviously other things that the businesses here in town offer, and I think those are some of the things that we can get into.
Good.
So I'd say a destination driver is that we're not on the I-70 corridor. We can use that. We're close to the Front Range. We're close to Colorado Springs. A lot of people make a big circle and come through Estes to get away from the high traffic areas. And so that, for some, is a destination driver.
And that whole proximity and ease of access just being a key element.
And the tradition of families coming to Estes Park for family reunions and just being in the mountains is a destination driver. Not even in the park, but just in the mountains.
Sure.
And certainly the amount of animals we have around here. People love to come see the wild animals. Two-legged or four.
The other thing I'll comment on since I first came here from South Texas is the cool weather in the summer. That's always a driver, and that brings a lot of people here.
So weather, wildlife, the proximity, ease of access, the park itself.
And I think we're forgetting a main thing in the summer, our weddings. Estes Park is a major wedding destination in the summer.
You know, you bring up a really intriguing and sometimes one that does get too often overlooked. I had Sonoma County as one of the clients, and Sonoma has focused a lot of their CVB efforts on the weddings market, and that's been their #1 growth segment over the last 2-year period of time. And it's an area that more of the DMOs, the CVBs, are saying if we've got this truly unique physical environment, How do we take advantage of that? And we'll talk more about this, but in Sedona, when we're working with them, one of the challenges is working with our Forest Service partners. And are there ways that we can open up some of these amazing natural environments in ways that have limited impacts to sensitive lands, but still provide some of these truly unique environments for us to target and serve up and speak to that weddings market. That's an intriguing one, and one that more and more destinations are really putting a bullseye on. Other thoughts?
Yeah, over here. Thanks. One thing we didn't mention is the YMCA and the Chile camp. And beyond just the people who go there, it's amazing when you tell stories and people tell stories. When we went down to the legislature when they passed the resolution on Rocky Mountain National Park, I was amazed at how many legislators all wanted to tell a story of their connection to Estes Park. They all had some, when I was a kid, or my grandfather took me fishing there. I went to the Y there when I was a kid, or I went to Chile camps. It goes way beyond that, because those people then come back as adults. They may not go to the camp, but that drives a lot of people. The other thing is the events and festivals, the rodeos, the horse events, the Scottish festival, the events that we have drive a lot of people. When we just had this discussion with my staff yesterday, said if you're sitting in Lakewood and you're home and it's a busy weekend, what's going to make you come to Estes Park instead of go to Dillon or to somewhere else? You know, what can we offer to make our communities a place you'd want to go with your family? And those are the kind of things. Well, you know, there's a festival going on in Estes Park, there's a bluegrass festival, or there's a horse show I want to go to. So I think our festival events are a big one of their destination drivers.
Absolutely. The whole event and festivals can be critical destination drivers, and particularly if some of those can have sequenced over an extended period of time, so there's something going on a somewhat continual basis. And your point about the why, I haven't been out to see the facility, just looking at some of the background, but that really is an amazing, when you think about the scale and the number of bodies. And the thing that you brought up that was really intriguing was not just that experience as a kid, but how that resonates, how that carries through, and are there new and different ways to capture that story? Absolutely. That to me could be a huge, powerful way where we're talking about synergistic and ways to leverage some of those existing powerful assets.
Same way with weddings. I mean, most people only, well, maybe several times they might come here and get married, but it's not something we can invite the same people come back every summer to get married. But we want to leverage off of that.
But you have people that have come here since they were little kids.
Right.
That have the experience of coming here as kids and then come back to get married.
Right, or people that got married here and we want to have them come back and leverage off because they did get married. Yeah, for other things.
And
the other I want to mention about the events too, is the other thing, and you mentioned it here, is we've been kind of reactive to that until the last year or so. We just kind of put in whatever event came up and then we put it on and react to it. I think we need to do a lot more of targeting what kind of events do we want to have, based on who do we want to attract, when do we want to have them. There are certain times of the year we don't need more events, but we need to be a lot more strategic about planning those events, about when do we bring them in, where do they come, who do we want to attract, what kind of people will come here, and then design our events around that rather than be reactionary to anybody who comes.
You are 100% right on, and I again, just another sort of reinforcement of way too many destinations have been exactly in that reactive mode. But when you talk about, here's event number 42, but they want the third weekend in June. And we don't need another the third weekend in June, but maybe with the right resources, if we could team it with, we could convince them to come in March or in an off-season period of time. So really important to think along that lines. We've got a woman back here, and then we'll take you, and then the woman in the back.
One additional destination driver that hasn't been mentioned is the two rivers that we have right downtown. They're natural, they're free-flowing, they're clean. People typically think of a river experience as a place to go fishing, but I think There are many people that enjoy the tranquility, the peace, the sensory experience of walking along the river. We have opportunities where children and adults can interact with the water and touch it and feel it and play in it. And there's an amenity there that I think we need to be cognizant of and protect.
And you know what's really powerful is sometimes when you link some of those environments with a unique piece of sculpture or art or interpretation where you're hitting on multiple senses, and it reinforces the whole wellness, and it can hit on a lot of different thinking. So those natural environments in the river and the water, and can we be using that? They're acting maybe not as a driver, more as an accelerant today, but if we did X, Y, and Z, they could become a more powerful element. But let me have the woman. Oh, sir, and then the woman? Sure.
If I'm understanding right, what you want us to do is to be able to think about both the businesses and attractions that we have in the community from the standpoint of a driver, accelerant, or a dependent.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
Would it be correct to assume that that those categories also have a membrane, so like a permeable barrier between each one, for depending on who the visitor is?
Certainly, and some can act as a driver for certain customer segments, but not resonate whatsoever for others. You're right.
For example, the ARC might be a driver, and why somebody might want to come back to, go to Estes and, hey, I want to, take my kids there.
Right.
But in terms of the bigger picture, the major commanding heights of our destination are things like the park, the Stanley Hotel, the YMCA, whereas accelerants might be things like horseback riding and putt-putt and rafting.
You're hitting on exactly, and again, if we were doing a more extensive study, there'd be a lot more time, but that's the kind of thinking that we're after, of saying, okay, what are our drivers, what are our accelerants, are there some of the accelerants that could maybe be moved into a driver, and then very importantly, and you brought this point up, are there certain segments that it might not be acting as a driver for the entire destination, but for this target segment, it truly could be a driver and resonate with certain segments.
And the caution that you're saying is that dependent businesses are not the types of things that they can be important, but they're not the reason that
they round out the experience. Sure. But if you're saying we're going to put all of these energies and resources and minds and thinking in terms of creating and crafting some new product development opportunities, the last thing you want to do is just develop one more dependent amenity that really doesn't have the driving power. And while that may sound pretty obvious, too often that's the direction that momentum can take it, and after the end of the day, you really haven't achieved a whole lot through that process.
Are those things like community infrastructure, such as grocery stores or fast food chains, things that they can get anywhere else, but are critical in serving? It's a service, but it's not something that people are coming here for.
Yeah, and sometimes from a strategy, you talk about necessary but not sufficient. So they're necessary and they're sort of expectations, but they're not really going to drive. And so those can be a challenging balancing act where you've got to have those support services, but recognize if you're really trying to use a limited amount of resources and staff and time, and you're really trying to focus on those products that can really stimulate new demand and drive new interest in activity. Ma'am?
I just wanted to add, it's a little more distinguished with the destination driver on athletic challenge. I think people come up to be challenged athletically, and that could be rock climbing, it could be summiting, just going up to Alberta Falls for some. Also, it could be all the way out to doing an Estes Park Marathon, an event like that. So I think people, whatever it is, we are definitely a destination to be challenged. So.
And that umbrella of outdoor recreation and multiple, and it's not the individual assets, it's the combined assets that allow outdoor recreation to act as a driver, I think is very accurate. And I tell you, you bring up the marathon. The marathon is absolutely a driver for Sedona, and that's a huge. We're thousands and thousands, and the amount of identity and recognition they get through their annual marathon. I'll digress for just a second. This year, 24 hours before the marathon, they were having some rain, and the Forest Service contacted the CDB and said they decided for the first year after the 12-year history or whatever of the marathon that they weren't going to allow them to go through Forest Service lands. So they had 24 hours to try and think about how they, and thousands of runners, and how do we get out. So it resonates, huh? But outdoor recreation, very important. Ma'am.
I think somebody already hit on the, kind of talked around the historical tourism nature of this area. Has a significant amount of not only National Register properties, but Colorado Registry properties. The historical traveler is a huge driver.
And that whole history and heritage can be so powerful. The Scottsdale example of losing that. And one of the challenges is how do you bring those stories alive? And if you don't have a docent who can be walking you around and telling those stories, they can be extremely captivating and motivating, but it's how do we serve that up, and particularly how do we serve that up to today's audiences in ways that are going to resonate with their expectations and how they want to be engaged.
I think as we look at our product, I think back to why I came here quite a few years ago and what was unique. And we talk about, Visit Estes did their branding. They talked about unique to Estes. As we evaluate events, we talk about things that are unique. And I see a need for new stuff, but I also see a need for those real unique, you can only get it here in Estes Park. And developing those things, putting a new spin on them, but keeping them, people come here because they remember that experience and keeping that there for them.
Well, I'd like to delve into that, and I think as we break out in the afternoon and have an opportunity to talk about some of those ones that could be enhanced or linked, or that's exactly the kind of dialogue we want to start getting out in a little broader kind of context as we go through the afternoon. Oh.
I just have a tie-on onto the weddings. My husband and I came up here on our honeymoon, and I think honeymoon packages would be really special up here because we fell in love with Colorado, we fell in love with Estes Park, and here we are.
How about anniversaries?
And that too, yes.
And
It continues.
I just might reinforce, there's a big difference between saying we're in that game and really being in that game. I'll harken back to that Sonoma example. That CVB, go on their website. They act almost as a wedding planner entity, and they've got pre-packaged recommendations. If you're the wine enthusiast, here's the venues, here's the different elements, here's the hotels. If you're the shopaholic and the girls' getaway, here's all the things. But whether it's anniversaries, whether it's the weddings, it's really thinking about how do we put the different pieces within the destination and make it easy for that visitor to understand. Oh, I never really thought about all these different pieces that really reinforce that theme. And so really powerful, but it really requires this kind of thinking to say, okay, what are those right wedding and anniversary elements, and how do we put those things and make it easy for that visitor to sort of understand those experiences. Yeah, Bill.
Before I get into my spiel, having worked with the Visit Estes Park Board, I'm really surprised we've been quiet for so long.
Well, break the ice here, Bill.
At any rate, I cannot validate what I'm about to say, but in combination with all that I've heard, my perception is that one of our drivers, or perhaps it's an accelerant, is the perception that we are humble and affordable.
And that whole sort of mindset, and it gets back to sort of the target customer segments. And is that a differentiated factor that we can segment ourselves from the other competitive destinations, and how do we maximize that? And then as we get into future product development, are there other products that are reinforcing that that thematic kind of area?
I wanted to touch on linkages and how we can convert some of our amenities to accelerants and drivers. And a big project that's taken some time is a Creative Arts District, and it's developing some momentum now. And we applied for state designation last spring, and we finished 8th and they picked 7. But what we learned through that application process was that we have the product here. We just haven't done anything to create the linkages and brand it and market it. And I think for people like John Erickson over here, who has really unique products, there are people who will come back to those kinds of shops, and it becomes a driver because they're coming back to that specific shop. And so making those linkages can help convert some of our existing, and so just wanted you to get your thoughts on that.
You raise a really important part, and I think the whole arts and cultural side, oftentimes there really are some great existing assets, but they're dispersed. There might be a placard, but very little interpretation. But how do we put those linkages together? And with today's technology, more and more, it's not just the map and the guided tour experience. It's the downloadable iPod where the artist is telling his backstory of what he was thinking when he crafted X, Y, or Z. And so it brings that whole experience to a whole new light. And frankly, pretty inexpensive to develop that. But it's how do you get that out in front? How do you work with a DMO organization to get those in the hands of those enthusiasts? But that art and cultural holds, I think, a lot of potential as well.
It strikes me that the driver concept is ultimately in the eye of the beholder or the eye of the guest, as opposed to the presumption that we can call them out as we go. And to David's point earlier, which guests don't we want, or how many, when is too many, who do we stop at the top of Pole Hill, check their financial statement before we let them come down? I'll suggest a driver, the driver is ultimately Elkhorn Avenue and the mall walk concept in the summertime to a particular group of guests. The dining circumstance, much maligned by certain portions of the community, is indeed a driver for a certain guest group as well. So as we try to put together this product development, ultimately it strikes me we need to consider who we don't want to come or how we're going to spread them around in some fashion.
You get some laughs on that, but that's an extremely important discussion to have. And we sometimes use the term we've got to fire our bad customers. And down in Florida, the spring break was one example where a couple of the communities fired their bad customers. They would generate some pretty big income for the hotels, but the damage, the pressure that they would put on the community, and not only that, the identity. I think it was the gentleman back here talking about the why and the good images that portrayed. Sometimes the bad customers can portray some negative stigmas in image and put sort of an umbrella. So sometimes thinking about, are there some segments that maybe you don't fire them, but you're not catering, and you're certainly not trying to think about proactive product development that would be reinforcing some of those guest segments that you're not so interested in. We're running a little short on time, so I think, did you have anything else? Oh, sure. Adam, yeah.
Have you found in the past that sometimes community members, residents, people who are very involved in the community make assumptions in reference to why guests come to their community? Maybe they're so wrapped up in local type things. And one of the things that kind of comes to my mind from a technology standpoint is a lot of people come to our community because of the nature, because of the Rocky Mountain National Park. But in today's 21st century world, they also want to be able to stream their Netflix on their iPads. within a cabin and things like that. And I think that sometimes as residents, as locals, we don't think that we need to have certain services because we have an expectation of why the guest would come here in the first place. So we kind of hinder ourselves. So I'm wondering if you found that in the past.
Absolutely. We're working in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and there's some new large utility power lines going through. And when we talk to the hotel operators up there, they're less concerned about the phone towers and the repeaters, because you're exactly right. That's what their guests not just want, they're demanding. And if you're not able to serve that kind of experience yeah, they want a great day on the slopes or on the outdoor recreation, but certainly when they get back, they want to have access on their phones, on their iPads, and very important. Both you and Scott brought up the point of making sure that we're not just thinking about us in the room, but also what's the guests say, and we're going to touch on that in just a second. Yeah, Lynette.
Just one last thing. I was thinking feeling. I mean, people come here because they feel safe. We have the village downtown that resonates a comfortable, safe feeling, and in this world today, safe is, huge.
It sure is, and it goes with Bill's when you talk about family and moderate costs and safe, and all of those sort of play together. They can be an important mix of factors. And I'll tell you what, I've been working a lot down in southern Arizona, and with the violence and the drug, boy, those poor guys. The reality is it's this much of a reality problem, but it's perceived this much in the visitors' eyes and has really been wreaking havoc for those folks. So safety and security and how that plays into the family is certainly an important element. Well, that's real helpful to sort of, for me to sort of get perspectives of the different thoughts on drivers and accelerants. If we move back on to some of this discussion that we were having here as far as what about some of the decelerants or some of the critical issues, the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And you're in a really nice position because, Elizabeth, you just completed the 2015 partner survey here just in the last couple of weeks. You also did work back in 2010, 2011 on asking the visitor what they thought, what was resonating with them. So let's take a little look at some of these findings. This was from the 2010-2011 visitor survey. And what, Elizabeth, you asked was the satisfaction with the Estes Park visit. And this sort of gets to what we were just talking about with the drivers and accelerants, the park, the outdoor recreation, the overall experience. And that sort of hits on a lot of these where how do you really put all of these different pieces together? The staff friendliness, and I think, Bill, when you talked about family and just sort of this comfortable kind of feel, that's recognized in terms of the friendliness. A little lower on the price value, and then the shopping, dining, and certainly the parking that I've heard a lot about over our discussions so far. I think the overall guest experience rating was very high at 94%, and that shopping, dining, and parking received the lowest rankings. Any surprises in that list, or does this make sense and resonate with most of you?
How does that overall experience rating compare with Aspen or Breckenridge or some of the other ones?
I don't know, Elizabeth, if this group has done any similar work. You raise a good point, because oftentimes where these kinds of numbers become much more useful is if you can benchmark that to a norm. I don't think that this was part of a broader undertaking, so we don't have the benefit of that. But just in big picture, 94%. That's obviously a very strong and a very high rating. Anything strike you when you look at this, Elizabeth, in terms of things that make sense or that would have surprised you at all?
not so much surprising. I think we have to keep in mind, based on the season, our guest responses change. So we have heard that in the summer, our guest satisfaction numbers are at their lowest, and primarily that is that parking, waiting to get into a restaurant challenge. And then that changes with the season. So we at Estes Park monitor that and try to support those challenges and seek opportunities to overcome them.
Well, that's a good point in terms of how that varies or how that changes on a seasonal kind of basis. John, did you have a point there?
I find it interesting the shopping, dining, and parking are low, and yet downtown area, which essentially consists of shopping, dining, and parking, still gets a pretty good score.
Yeah, and we'll get into this as we continue on, because there is some of this dichotomy in terms of thoughts on the downtown, and it'll be good to have a little bit more dialogue along that lines.
Walk around in the summer?
Yes.
So this
That was year-round.
Was it through the whole year or
Yep.
the summertime? It was all year? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was just from a methodology, very good, very strong, because you did that through the entire year and had multiple intercept points, and very good that way. You also asked them, and this sort of gets back to our destination driver dialogue and discussion, what were the factors in their fundamental decision to visit Estes Park? What was rated extremely or very important? And look at that very top one. I think, Elizabeth, you said that was one that you had just recently added as far as this catch-all.
Yeah, right before we went live with the survey, we decided maybe it's a good idea to throw in a relaxing mountain getaway. It was like, oh, whatever, throw it in. And it ended up being number one. So I think it serves an example of it's a continuous process and challenge to know what our guest wants, and we have to continually be in tune with that and react to it.
But it really resonates, and part of the question was, are the people in the room saying something that is different from the visitor? But the park, the wildlife viewing, someone was bringing that up. The outdoor recreation that was brought up in the back. Bill, you talked about the low cost, the good value. And here, 55%, we're seeing the downtown area was an extremely or very important element in their visit decision. So somewhat of that dichotomy, as you say, with the restaurants. And then part of the question, and I forget who was making the comment back here on history and heritage, but so, about a third of the folks saying that was important. But, can we get that 30% to 40% or 50% and having history and heritage a more important piece of that whole pie? And festivals and events also important at a little lower level, but certainly an important point where we can stimulate demand in certain periods, and certainly something that we need to be oriented in. And just I might reinforce this, really gets to your point, Elizabeth, with the seasonal differences. In the summer months, the park was by far the most important driver, but in the winter, it was this relaxing mountain getaway. It was this more all-encompassing type of feeling or environment that was most powerful. And the fall, it was the wildlife viewing. So recognizing different seasons, different orientations, you can have different roles of those sort of key destination driver elements as well. There were a couple of comments in the back here.
I just would add that we're also, I'm curious who the visitor would be. Would they be arriving in a car or a bike? And if they're on a bicycle, they might have a really different experience around some of these things. So I don't know, sometimes I kind of feel like we limit, or we can make an assumption who our visitor will be or who will they be in the future.
Yeah, and I think part of that, and I don't remember the intercept points that all of the various, and they did do a fair amount of work of trying to ensure that there were multiple ones. But you bring up a good point in terms of who are you intercepting, and could there be segments that we might not be hitting just by the intercept points that we're doing our surveying at.
So I think one distinction for me is when I look at this, I think to myself, experience and expectations sometimes go together. When we have an expectation of what a dining experience should be like, we tend to judge it. When we know what shopping feels like, we tend to judge it. That's good shopping, mediocre, or great shopping. I think with a relaxing mountain getaway that's very subjective, and I think Estes is definitely a great place for that, as well as all the outdoor stuff, because I think a lot of people don't have a vast framework of looking at what is my expectation. The peaks are beautiful, the wildlife is out there, you can't take a bad picture in Rocky. And I think Estes has rested its laurels on its success on the fact that we are a gateway to Rocky. I've been here for 24 years. I think where we start to see the numbers drop is when we have expectations from people coming from the Front Range or people coming from the Midwest or Texas, which is where most of our people come from, that they're starting to judge and looking at shopping, dining, lodging, the things that everybody's familiar with.
You raise a really good point, and I think we're going to hit on some of that as we go into some of the SWOT factors, because in the partner survey, some of that came through pretty loud and clear, and so we'll expand on that. Mayor, you have one more point, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, these really are interesting charts for a number of reasons, and we compete with the other mountain communities for our visitors and for revenue. If you look at festivals and special events, and you look at Vail and Telluride, they have made a huge deal out of that, and they've got millions of dollars coming in as a result of it. Now, I'm not sure that in terms of the residents in the community, how they're enjoying that, but it's very different than what we are. So, and the other mountain communities are becoming more and more competitive with us, because while they've been traditionally ski towns, they're now going after year-round business, the same way that we're trying to reverse ours and go after more business in the winter. So I think understanding our strengths and weaknesses and being able to differentiate ourselves, and it may be very small differences, but understanding what they are and promoting them is going to be very important for us.
Yeah, and you know this firsthand, but recognizing those SWOT factors, but putting that in a competitive context is also a very important part of the overall process. Well, let me shift. So this was just some of the. I'm going to hit on two other really quick points here, and this relates to that discussion we were having as day visitor versus the overnight. Look at these numbers. So that overnight visitor is contributing 8 times on average what the day visitor is generating. So much like our Indiana Dunes example, the ability to connect and engage and convince more of those people who are experiencing Estes Park as a day visitor, maybe not on that trip, but to return and make sure they're understanding here's this whole range of activities and experiences that awaits them, and they've got to plan another return trip. But certainly you can see a big difference there in the spending profiles, and the whole point when we're thinking about proactive new product development, is it going to be product that can resonate more with that overnight visitor? And Bill, when you talked about some of those segments that you might not, I'm sorry, Scott, that you're not so excited about, make sure that we're not just developing another segment that's going to attract a greater number of the day visit segments. And that's also has a geographic kind of context. This outlines the average spending from a guest coming from Colorado versus from a variety of the other key feeder states. And so again, when we're talking about new product ideas or concepts, you know, oftentimes luring more of the Colorado residents is an easier sell. But again, from a higher value visitor segment, thinking about some of those longer haul segments and what will resonate with them, what will convince them to choose Estes Park and carve out more of their longer term vacation within Estes Park will be really important. So we can look at that visitor survey. We need to continue to go back to that as we're thinking about new ideas and new concepts. But let's shift from what the visitor is saying, from what you are saying, essentially from the partner survey. This was done very recent. The last couple of weeks of February was when many of you responded to the request. Over 220 responses, so a really good broad range, and ranging from shopping, lodging, dining activities, so a really good cross sections of participants in sharing their ideas. And Elizabeth noted this when she was kicking things off, but look at the number one when she asked, review the following lists of continued opportunity areas and rank them in order of priority. Number one, destination product development, above local event marketing, above groups and meetings, above international, and above bus tours. It strikes me that it's frankly a little surprising that, and when Elizabeth was saying she was thinking maybe a year, and here we are 9 months, and I think this is resonating. People are understanding this is an area that we need to be focusing on and putting efforts and energies in. One of the questions that was posed was a series of the SWOT factors, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I want to, this is a little involved here, but I want to walk through some of these and see if these resonate with you. Are we missing some? Are there others that we need to be cognizant of? On the strengths, it's the proximity of the Front Range, the park, the area's beauty, nature, wildlife. There's plenty of lodging and restaurants. The surrounding potential environment for activities, thinking in a broader regional kind of context. More affordable than other resort towns. Bill, you brought that up before. Family destination, safe, inviting, affordable, great walking town, friendliness of locals, easy to get here. You don't have to go I-70, close proximity to the airport in Denver, Boulder. We have great minds here and good people who work together. Pretty good lists of strengths. Are there others that you think, as we're thinking about Estes Park as a visitor destination, that we need to be making sure that we're recognizing, that we're cognizant of? Yes, back in the back.
I would say something we sort of ignored, but not, and because I was with so many young people in this business that I'm getting a lot of information about, is that we are currently a drug-free zone. In the state of Colorado, marijuana is and what. So we need to identify the fact that we have partnered with the national park, and maybe sort of by necessity, the national park is drug-free. We therefore have not.
I was just asked the other day, how many pot shops are in Estes Park? And I said none. And thank you, town board, for making it that way.
Well, and that's a really good example of sort of a decision that reinforces some of those broader, the family orientation, the safe, and all of that. Really another element that reinforces and brings that point sort of front and center. Other thoughts on strengths that we haven't touched on?
Maybe not a separate one, but your third one there, the plenty of lodging and restaurants. Just to reiterate that Estes has a variety of lodging, very good, and it's appealing to people. The YMCA, as we touched on, the building we're in now.
Certainly.
In addition to that, the 400-plus vacation rental homes that we have in Estes really provides an experience for our guests to really feel like they're part of the community when they're here and able to stay multiple nights with their family.
So that diversity of
Yes.
product is not just the numbers, but the diversity certainly a strength.
Exactly.
Good, good. What about some of the weaknesses? We talked about decelerants, essentially. Lack of more sophisticated shops and vendors. Getting old, run-down and tired. And let me reinforce, these aren't right or wrong. They were just opinions that came through with the survey, and we tried to pull out the ones that were more frequently cited. Traffic and parking, not year-round. Not enough activities to attract families when weather is bad. Reliance on summer tourism, not being up to date with new styles and development that other towns are incorporating. The age of leadership in the community. We need more young people to be involved. That's our risk of not being a unique town anymore. Fragmented cultural art scenes. Reputation of being a t-shirt and taffy only shop. Internet bandwidth availability. Employee housing. And this last one, no one wants more visitors. And I can't tell you the number of smaller, mid-sized towns where that sort of resident rebellion, and how do we find that balance? Do these weaknesses, are they accurate? Are they reasonable? Are there any that you think are unfair?
I think you're right on.
How do you turn them into strengths is the question.
Pardon me?
How do you turn them into strengths?
Well, and I think particularly as it relates to what we're doing here today, it's going to be, as we are thinking about new product, new opportunities, new experiences, are there elements that can start addressing some of these weaknesses? And that's where I was sort of getting at earlier in the day, that if we don't have some of this foundation that we started talking through, and what are some of the critical issues and the strengths, when we're starting to prioritize, well, let's go to product 4 or product 7, it's very difficult to make those decisions if we haven't done the homework and thought through some of these issues, and then proactively thought about, okay, if we push this product to the front of the heap here, it really has some opportunities to address X, Y, and Z that are currently weaknesses.
And you can also slide some of your strengths over to a weakness.
Well, you
have shifting of columns, right? To look down the road and look at both the pros and the cons of addressing some of those.
You bring up a really important point, and it's the mindset of, you absolutely don't want to do something that denigrates what makes the destination special in the first place. And too often we've seen that with overdevelopment and too much of the wrong customer segments.
I call it the panacea syndrome.
Panacea syndrome?
The
Yep.
panacea syndrome. If
Well,
you just do this, the world will be perfect.
well, and oftentimes thinking through some of those unintended consequences is really critical. And that, again, is why I think it's so neat that we've got this mix of heads and you know thinking through, because that's exactly the kind of dialogue that should be occurring as we go through the process. Elizabeth, in the back there.
One of the questions, I actually have one comment and one question. Could you give us examples of where Estes, the one, I don't have my glasses on, but the one that you read that said something about we're not up to date?
Yeah.
Could you give us some examples of that? And as this town well knows, internet is not one of our strengths. And as we talk about trying to bring the the younger population, I'm talking about, 20s, 30s, 40s, the people who really want to come and be tranquil, but boy, they want to do their internet when they're in that room. And that's something we have to address big time.
Yeah, and I think I'll just reread this, not being up to date with new styles and development that other towns are incorporating. And I think a fair amount of that resonates with how are today's visitor segments changing and what resonates with a boomer isn't resonating with a Gen Xer and certainly isn't resonating with a millennial. And if we're still serving up that product the same way we did 20 years ago, we better be careful, because we're setting ourselves up for some challenges 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. And while a relaxing mountain environment is fantastic for me, for a 20-something that wants this active, engaging outdoor recreation, and you're not seeing, the point you bring up, and Utah's done an amazing job of active, engaging outdoor recreation. And so how do we make sure that we're crafting some of our products in ways that are going to resonate with these evolving segments? Very, very important. Some of the opportunities, revitalization of downtown, work on winter activities, more marketing as a family-friendly, healthy environment, expanding our shuttle to year-round to improve resident visitor experiences, TIF use, particularly as it relates to the Winter Activity Center, parking structures, maybe tax increases on second homeowners, develop Estes Park as a world-class altitude training area. Destination Wellness is going to offer a lot. Add street art, street performance, and make the town feel active by adding bike lanes, bike parking, and investing in improvements for pedestrian dog walkers. And we're not putting these up as these are, again, are the answers, but this is the kind of thinking that we want as far as stimulating some of the thoughts, the ideas. Jim?
I would only observe that all those threats can be summarized under the phrase, we've always done it that way.
So let me...
You've got to break out of that mold, and most of those threats will go away.
Let me shift. Jim was shifting from opportunities to threats. Let me walk through those real quickly. Natural disasters.
We can't control that, obviously.
But you can control. Oftentimes, the press presents that in a much expanded, and the challenge is we know we're going to face some of these. How do we proactively meld some of this so that we're in a better position?
Estes Park is always open.
No. Traffic. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but compulsive negativity, looking for a panacea and not looking at multifaceted solutions. That really sort of gets lack of a ski area, people being stuck in their ways, people retreating to their silos again and not working together, losing our middle and upper income class visitors and not modernizing the town, having businesses stay open when they say they're going to be open, businesses catering to one-time visitors and not the repeat visitors, and amenities not changing as quickly as target markets.
Because we've always done it this way.
So, and that's frankly, Jim, a pretty normal settling position that I think part of it's just sort of human nature, that it's easy to keep on keeping on instead of shaking some things up. And frankly, some of these dialogues and discussions can be a little bit challenging when you're taking a more honest and realistic look at what's not working and how we need to change. And so changing some of those threats, addressing some of those threats, really important. Any of those threats that you think is inaccurate, not truly representative of where you're at? Okay, sure. Yeah, we jump through that a little quicker.
Being as part of the younger generation, I kind of wanted to go back on something that Lois was saying. I was kind of hoping that maybe instead of taking the whole, marijuana initiative that's going around in the rest of Colorado, and Estes Park obviously has not joined in on that, which is great. But instead of putting it out there and saying something to the effect of that we're not, we really haven't made a statement as of it, and we're still getting the younger, generations up here. I think it'd be wiser, instead of just putting it out there that we're not, joining in on it. We're not supporting it. We're a drug-free zone. Just making it very well known that we're a wellness destination. If we just keep putting that out there, we're a wellness destination. Estes Park is healthy. We're a wellness destination. If we just keep emphasizing that, we just keep putting it out there, and just don't talk about marijuana. We just don't talk about pot at all. We're still going to bring the younger generation in, and we're just not going to encourage it at all, because right now it's not a bigger issue. When people ask, we let them know, things that happen, but it's never become a bigger issue. And if we put out there that we are a drug-free zone, we don't allow marijuana in this town, we don't do this, we don't do that, you are going to get the younger generation that is going to push back, and it's going to become a bigger deal than it is.
And that's an interesting perspective, and one where there isn't an easy one-size-fits-all response. And certainly there's, both in Colorado and Washington, some communities that are putting a lot of effort in pot tourism and using that as an attribute. And so is there a balance where there's sort of a sweet spot where maybe you're not being too over the top, but
I think we've kind of found it. We just haven't really made a huge deal of it, and we haven't had a lot of pushback.
Good. Was there someone, back in the back and then up here?
Reaching out to surrounding communities and working in partnership, and what I'm thinking is, possibly a threat is that, if we're not working with Allen's Park, so to speak, about how our communities being connected, how can we strengthen each other through connection? And that could be through our Highway 7, connecting, creating destination for both communities. And, I'm thinking a bike lane, better highways between both locations.
I might even broaden that out a little bit in the point of thinking in more of that kind of regional orientation, where you're not just keeping the bookends on Estes Park. Are there a broader range of products in a broader regional kind of context that are really synergistic, that rise all tides, and instead of often term used, but co-opetition? Are they a competitor? Are they an ally? And in many instances, working with some of those regional partners and combining some of those product opportunities can be a really strong opportunity as well. John, did you, anyone? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Someone back in the back? Sure, sorry, I didn't see you there.
I just wanted to add one more thing as far as opportunities. A lot of younger people ask me, what do you do here at night? There's no nightlife in this town. And I think, creating more cultural stuff maybe for the older communities, great, and everybody, but there is no nightlife here. And that deters people
that's a very important
an hour
threat.
Up and an hour down. It's a lot of driving for a lot of people.
And if we're trying to speak more to those millennials and Gen Xers.
Families that they got the sitter, now what are they going to do? Movie, okay, dinner, okay, that's it.
And that again sort of raises a very good point in terms of saying, okay, so from a product development standpoint, are there some of those elements that could have a nighttime element to them as well as a daytime or what have you?
So there was some nightlife here at the Stanley this weekend. How many knew about it? How many in this room knew about it?
We got a few.
Because it was leftover salmon plate for 3 nights, 3 days, one afternoon, 2 nights and 1 afternoon. And I mean, the place rocked. And talk about nightlife. I mean, the owner of the Stanley Hotel did a great job by bringing this band here, and a beautiful venue. He plans to do more. But what was surprising to me was how many locals I didn't see.
Is that right, huh?
Yes.
Interesting.
There was maybe a handful of locals, and honestly, those of us that were there, we found out from people from other communities that had bought tickets and were our friends and said, hey, we're coming up. You're what? Coming up here, but I mean, I'm not sure, but the point there is, I mean, just to address her thing about nightlife, I think those kinds of things will eventually work toward that. I mean, it's an incredible thing to do a concert series, for whatever age group, and of course this was for a younger group.
Yep.
And while I have the microphone, I'm going to say too, we have to give some credit where credit's due, because we would not be having this conversation right now if we had not, as you mentioned, laid the foundation of the groundwork through these surveys to have this information in front of us now to work with. So I think credit is due to Visit Estes Park for getting us to this point, at least, where we have a foundation where hopefully we can talk, but then we can make decisions and bring those decisions to action.
Yeah, well, and you've got some of that foundation with some of the legwork that's been done in
Exactly.
previous weeks
Well, I
and
mean,
previous months.
we're able to have this conversation because of this information we have on the screen in front of us. So
the
kudos
one-
to Visit Estes Park for getting us to this point.
Oh, good. One other point just to reinforce that, because I think too often we don't do enough work out to our resident constituency, and these kinds of opportunities that would never have an opportunity to be put on, but for the incremental spending of the external visitors, and for our internal residents to have that for an easy night of, and whether the band happened, this particular instance happened to be that whole opportunity of the richness, the diversity. Give you a story. We were working in Chicago, Michigan Avenue, Magnificent Mile. And the whole issue of how do we get back to the community, how important the visitor base is. It's not just that, too many visitors are along Michigan Avenue, but we came up with the saying, it was about 50% of the expenditures in restaurants and the retail shops were visitor. And we went out to the resident base talking about it would be a magnificent half a mile, but for the visitor base. And how do we help our local residents understand how much deeper, richer, more expansive these quality of life amenities that they appreciate because of the incremental spending that the external visitor brings in? And your example on the concert is a good example there.
Also, I'll say that there's a lot of baby boomers in this room, but I don't think that getting old necessarily means that you have to close your mind down. You can keep an open mind, and I think that everyone that's in this room has a relatively open mind, even though we may be a little bit older, so like one of those complaints about,
Younger, that applies to someone else.
Which I think is true. I think that, but also, young people are out there working all the time. They don't have the time or the energy to devote necessarily to these volunteer, even the town board.
You bet. No, and I think from a broader kind of context, it's how do we make sure that some of those voices, some of those thoughts are being weaved in to some of these kinds of exercises that we're
Because by the same token, those who can have the energy to go to town board meetings are usually retired folks or someone that has an axe to grind. Their voice is heard. But I think that generally in this room, we have a lot of open minds, or you wouldn't be here. So just because you're a little bit up there in age doesn't mean you know.
Yeah, good point. Good point. One more, and then we'll take the mayor, and we'll go on to the next slide.
I was just sitting here thinking about the comments that were made about this being a wellness destination, and that being something that would be positively promoted. And then I was also thinking about the issue of marijuana, and it occurred to me that early on, and I think maybe still, the marijuana marketing industry has maybe successfully marketed themselves as a wellness product. Certainly that was how it got introduced on many state ballot initiatives throughout the nation and within our own, is that it was initially pushed as a medical component. And I don't know, I just wanted to, that's...
And I think this is just continuing that dialogue, that some of these are pretty complex issues, and it's not an easy yes or no, and could it be? But I think, again, it's these kinds of forums that what's critical is that there can be that environment where that kind of dialogue can occur and take place, and it isn't just a quick decision of yes or no, and some of that discussion can occur. Yeah, Mayor.
One of the threats that we face is affordable and available housing. And it affects all of our major services, but it also affects our seasonal workers, and it's getting worse instead of better. It's something that, again, the other mountain communities face, but most of them have a town just downhill where those people can live. We don't have that option.
And it gets back to when I was talking about sort of necessary versus sufficient, and you know, the housing, you know, we can come up with some great ideas, but if there isn't the housing for the employees to staff these new projects, we've got to be keeping those top of mind as well. Let me jump on and finish this portion up here, just talking about, so we talked about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Here were some of the sample critical issues that some also talked about. People want things to do. I think we are getting the name out there, but we need to follow through. We're making the pitch. We got to make sure that we deliver. That somebody over here talked about setting expectations, and are we fulfilling them? The need to continue to grow our town and give guests a reason to come and things to do as they enjoy the park. We as a town need to be aware that people view us as a tourist trap with 25 t-shirt shops and 10 taffy stores. And that respondent said, I'm exaggerating, but that's my broader point. The town, especially downtown businesses, should try to focus more on higher class options, not just t-shirts, as many guests find the town experience a null or negative experience relative to their national park experience. Estes Park has to be seen as a destination spot with attractive cultural offerings, music, art, dance, food, in addition to our great outdoors, candy, and t-shirt shops. We need to find out what the younger generation is wanting in a vacation experience. They're the future of Estes Park. I made destination development high because we need to create a destination to build off-season and shoulder traffic. We need to create a good product that will ensure local use, and as the locals use it, they'll spread it to their friends and families that live elsewhere. There'll be people who don't like the focus being pulled away from downtown, and that's understandable, but if people are relying on downtown businesses to sustain us here, we'll be here in a bad situation in the next 5 years. Destination wellness is an important piece of our strategic planning. We need to be working on how to make Estes Park a year-round destination. And Estes Park is rarely seen as a destination compared to other ski towns, even in the summer by most guests. Again, not that these are right or wrong, but that was how some of the partners framed some of their perspectives in terms of issues and critical points. So again, I think the point here is not that in one morning we're going to be able to resolve all of these, but I think it's gotten a lot on the table. Issues, SWOT factors, critical points, products as drivers, as accelerants, and helps us, I think, and will be beneficial as we go through the afternoon and start talking about some different kinds of product opportunities, and we can keep top of mind some of the issues that we've talked through the morning. So before we break for lunch, let me just take a few minutes and talk about...
Mitch, can I make one comment, please?
Sure, sorry.
Going back, and maybe you're headed that way, to the one of your first couple of slides, and that's dealing with targeting the customers first, and then seeing what can be provided. The issue of t-shirt shops, you know, again, how do we switch the people who come here who are only interested in buying a t-shirt because they're only here for a half a day, as opposed to the other things? And I just want to relate that back when you look at these issues as to how that can be
and keeping
focused in, you know, with your overall beginning of this program and how important that shift in dynamic will be.
Yep, and as we start the afternoon off, we'll talk about some of those target customer segments, but you're right, that has to be front and center. And I think the reality is, it's not that you're going to shut down some of those visitors that might not be as high value, but you certainly can be doing things in terms of new proactive product development in your marketing activities and some of your thematic kinds of activities that focus more on other segments. And it's not that you're, like I was, you know, my terminology, firing your bad customers. You're not maybe completely firing them, but you're not putting a whole lot of efforts to build and expand that segment more. So some examples as others have grappled with some of exactly what you're dealing with here in the last nine months. And I'm going to touch on Asheville. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Asheville, but a great mountain destination in the western part of North Carolina. And a lot of similarities with Estes Park, where a lot of the residents from the eastern cities come out to Asheville, and it's this great recreational gateway. Some might be familiar with the Biltmore Estate, just an amazing facility. Grove Park Inn is this great, like the Stanley, a great boutique property. The Blue Ridge Parkway, lots of assets. But what Asheville found was that some of their competitors were stepping up their game at a more aggressive rate, and they were losing market share, even though they had some great assets. And they recognized they had to keep proactive steps to keep top of mind, and they needed to get more active in a proactive product development kind of context. So this goes back to 2001, and what they did, they raised their room tax by a point from 3 to 4%, and launched a new tourism product program. And they focused much of their energies on products that could clearly demonstrate that there was going to be an increase in room nights generated from the introduction of those products. They dedicated that 100% to tourism development. And in their instance, what they did, they had a Buncombe County, which was the broader county tourism development authority, and they were the ones that provided the revenues and resources to the CDB. But they developed a separate product development committee that reported to the development authority. It was separate from the CDB, but they didn't want a whole new set of staff for this entity, so the CDB staff staffed the product development committee of the development authority. The funds that they raised through that one point, then they were providing to both for-profit and nonprofit entities in both direct grants and a pledge of debt service or in loan guarantees. In their instance, they had a 9-person review committee, and the process they go through, it's a 2-stage application process. A first stage essentially weeds out the ones that don't meet their criteria, and they spent a lot of time crafting the mix of criteria that you had to demonstrate to meet to be considered. And then you would move on to a secondary stage and a secondary application process. And in the time that they've undertaken this, you know, the amazing thing, the Convention and Visitor Bureau there, the director liked to tell the story, and Mayor, you'll appreciate this a little bit, but he was saying that it really changed very significantly in terms of the relationship with the city. And rather than just being seen as a marketing organization looking for funds and funding, they increasingly were seen as a critical ally, a critical partner in how the community developed and was perceived. And I loved this characterization. They've been using this now for almost a decade. Tourism builds community. And that's how they would get out to their residents, to their community, and really develop a much better and a much different kind of perspective to the relationship between tourism and the broader resident base. And they developed everything, some great youth soccer fields, fantastic for the community and all the younger kids, but also a critical piece in the youth soccer tournament play and bringing in a lot of the kids on that. And what was centerpiece at the pavilion for the soccer fields? The big tourism development authority that were the ones who funded it. It's these resources that are bringing these, and so every time a family with the kids came to play at the soccer park, they understood that connection with tourism. A great downtown park. Their arboretum. They funded, it's called the Blockhouse, but it's a live event, a younger venue. It's a for-profit, but it's all about how do we engage and how do we connect more with some of the younger audiences and ensure we have that kind of a venue. But probably one of the best examples of a group who's been doing it now for a while, has some real strong success stories, and is really seen as a really critical partner. And as I say, this community, or Tourism Builds community, is something that they're not just saying, it's really understood and embraced by mayor and council and many of the broader residents of Asheville. I was talking about Scottsdale. Scottsdale also has a tourism development commission. It's appointed by their city council. It's separate from the CVB. And back in 2010, they increased their bed tax by 2 points, and they dedicated half of that for marketing and publication, or PR, and other broader, more traditional roles, but 50% of it to tourism product development. And it was these funds that helped, that example I was given with the Western Museum of the West, that was critical in the funding and getting that off the blocks. They've also funded, some of you might be aware of the classic car auctions that Scottsdale does down there, and they needed to improve some of the facilities. Those things have just grown and grown, and have been just a huge winner. And it's the TDC and some of the resources that they've been able to bring to expand. They were talking about moving from Scottsdale to Vegas, and so we had to develop and expand and improve some of the facilities. This Desert Discovery Center is another example, like the Scottsdale Museum of the West, that's been on the drawing boards. It makes all the sense in the world. We've got this great Sonoran Desert environment, but we don't make it easy for that visitor to get out and experience the desert and how and interpret and all of that. But we haven't been able to get the funding. We're hopeful that through the TDC and some of the new resources that we'll be able to bring this one. And so it's not just the Museum of the West, it's also the Desert Discovery Center that will be a reality, rather than just being a project that gets dusted off every few years. You know, sometimes it's not just the individual community that can be a critical player in moving tourism product development forward. Look at this for a second. This is probably one of the most unlikely candidates that you would ever have thought of. But in Iowa, they convinced their state legislature to commit state gaming proceeds to a very major, they didn't call it tourism product development, but it was development to promote recreation, education, entertainment, and cultural activities. And they had a large Vision Iowa fund that funded large projects. They had to have a minimum size of $20 million. And then a smaller community attraction and tourism program for 119 different projects around the state were funded. And so the local community brought capabilities and resources to the table, but the state was also a very critical ally and partner in that in that process. Iowa, thinking about why was Iowa able to convince their legislators that product development and tourism was an appropriate area? And I think in a lot of instances, it's these kinds of groups where we need to rally from around the state and bring some different thinking sometimes. There's quite a number of states now that have tourism development grant programs, not to the scale of Iowa, but more and more of them are doing that. You don't have that currently in Colorado. Should be something that we're thinking, is there a role for the state, that the state can play an ally in some of that process? And one other example here, this is South Carolina. And what their state and their tourism office did was say, Estes Park shouldn't just be doing their thinking and their planning in a vacuum. This should fit into a much broader regional fabric. And they broke the state into 5 different planning regions, and they undertook this kind of planning process, but in a much broader kind of context. So the work that would be going on in Estes Park made sense because the community down the road was doing this, and the community down the road, and somebody back there had talked about the regional kind of thinking, but really taking that on front and center. And again, an example where the state has played a front runner role in trying to pursue and coordinate some of this kind of thinking. Obviously, that's a longer-term challenge and goal, but I do want to throw that out, that while you absolutely need to be taking the bull by the horns, recognize that in many states, they think about this in a broader kind of context, and sometimes those state resources can be an important supplement in terms of technical assistance and resources and those kinds of things to the kinds of activities and initiatives that we're talking about here. See how we're doing on time. We're a little early. The last slide here that I want to touch on, different environment, but the CEO up in the Vancouver CVB, they went through a big Vancouver tourism master planning process, and I really liked how he framed as they pulled all of this together. And let me just read this. What was isn't, what is won't be. We have a chance to influence what comes about. 30 years down the road, the Vancouver we have is being shaped or not shaped by today's decision. And I think that's very telling in terms of where we're at with this kind of session, where we want to be, and to be Estes Park having that same kind of mindset. You're framing, you're setting the stage for what Estes Park is 10, 20, 30 years down the road. So a little bit of time before lunch, so what I'd like to do is with this morning session where we've talked about why we're getting in the game, we're talking about setting the foundation, we're talking about products, we're talking about SWOT factors, we're talking about critical issues, we're talking about some of the approaches others have used. Just some general thoughts in terms of where we've been at in the morning, what resonated, what hasn't resonated, what you've got questions on?
I have a question on Asheville and Scottsdale, and the question is one of public versus private investment in terms of what took place. Can you comment on that?
And the reality, Mayor, the answer is it varies depending on the project. And so what the point in the from the bed tax, obviously that's the visitor numbers, but in many of the Asheville examples, their grants were in the range of $400,000, $500,000, sometimes a couple $100,000. They weren't the key financial piece, but they had a very strong advocacy role. Sometimes it's not really just the dollars that they can bring to the table, but if they can leverage a collective industry and support, frankly, in front of a group like yours, that can be a very powerful piece for a developer if you can bring that kind of advocacy kind of role. And while they were able to bring grant or some debt service assistance, oftentimes it wasn't their funding piece wasn't the critical element. There were other private and public sector sources that came into play, but they had a seat at the table and were seen as an important.
And you mentioned one word, which was industry. So did that help to fund bringing industry there as well as tourism?
Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of let me bring the example in Scottsdale with the cars. That has manifested itself in terms of other automotive examples, and while the auctions themselves are only for a few weeks in January, that's really played out to other support elements and services for Scottsdale. I'm trying to think, the Western example had a broader downtown redevelopment play, and how do we help support the declining art community. So I have to think more specifically, but I think absolutely that's the goal, where it's not just that we create a product that can, again, attract 80,000 visitors or whatever, but is there a broader, and I might just bring on one other example, and this has to do with racing also, but with NASCAR. And NASCAR was doing a Hall of Fame, and Charlotte was in the running, but there were 4 or 5 other very strong competitors. And Charlotte pulled out all their stops, and they ended up being the successful bidder. But they saw it where it wasn't, again, just the attendance, but they had very large engineering and automotive engineering elements in their colleges and universities. They had many of the NASCAR support suppliers that were positioned in Charlotte, and the whole point of that was if they could lure the Hall of Fame there, it would be that much more difficult for this whole mix of support businesses and facilities to go to Detroit or to go to some other entity or destination. So thinking about are there playoff roles really important?
Going back to Scottsdale for a second.
Yeah.
The arts facility that's being constructed, will that be owned and operated by the city, or is that going to be?
The Western Heritage Museum will be funded by a separate nonprofit, and that was part of the city's deal, that they would use the TDC funds for the building, but the nonprofit had to demonstrate their ability to fund all the operating costs and reserves, and also bring in all of the collections and the elements. So it was really sort of that ultimate public-private nonprofit sort of mix where everybody had to bring a piece of the puzzle together to make it work.
Thank you.
I wanted to comment on the private or public investment in private enterprises. I think it's an important driver in the destination marketing piece, because this is a way that a town or community can strategically fund the investments they want to see come into their town, rather than reactively responding to what does come in. For instance, if you want to improve the shops downtown and would rather see a performing arts center there than more t-shirt shops, create an incentive for somebody to build a performing arts center. If you want more low-cost housing in this community, provide me an incentive to build apartments on the piece of land that I buy, rather than building a hotel, which is the easy money for me.
And that's a lot of carrot and stick kind of thinking, but pretty basic. And that's exactly go back to that Scottsdale example where, boy, we've got a downtown area that is not performing the way it used to. So how do we reintroduce a whole new level of foot traffic, bring in the kind of a visitor that could be synergistic with an art buyer? And it's that kind of thinking that 1 + 1 = 3, but it requires creative minds, creative thinking in terms of how we pull some of that off.
I wanted to add some thoughts on these funding mechanisms at the local level. Colorado has what's called a cultural and scientific district tax. The only place that currently has one is the Denver metro area. It's 7 counties, and it has a similar tier where there's certain funds that go to the large anchor institutions and smaller grants. And there's interest in doing that countywide in Larimer County, and I don't know where that's at, but it will probably come up again. And so one of the questions would be is how could Estes Park participate in that? And the other thing is that historically, when Visit Estes Park was launched, we thought of our job as solely marketing, but under the state statutes, local marketing districts can in fact conduct business development, business recruitment activities. And so trying to define what that looks like and what the role of Visit Estes Park is in destination product development is a real key component. But clearly, if you have dedicated tax for those kind of activities, one of my questions is how does that interact with the role of municipal government, or for Estes Park EDC, an economic development organization? How do you get that collaborative part working?
Yeah, and it can really run the gamut. Some of the states have essentially a tax recapture capabilities, and whether it's a geographic area, sometimes it's a specific product area. And so a developer meeting certain requirements, it's 15-20% of development can be recaptured through property tax abatement, through sales tax abatement, and sometimes proactive efforts can convince a legislature for a certain class of product. In our case in Arizona, we had a developer convince our legislature to define a special theme tax legislation where they were able to recapture 25% of the state sales tax. Not recapture, I'm sorry, increase by another 7 points the state sales tax and recapture that 7 points for X number of year. The project was the most ill-conceived. This was right outside of the Grand Canyon. And the point was, how do we capture more of those visitors and not have them move on to Vegas and keep them in Arizona? They convinced our legislature to do this. This had Indian native villages, medieval jousting, RV repair. They had soup to nuts. The thing never went anywhere. They would have had a checkout rate of 18% on every Coke, on every hamburger. But it was sort of shame on us as a tourism industry within Arizona because we didn't have our act together to say, here's the criteria, legislature, you should be using. And it wasn't, if you got the right lobbyist and the right storyline, you can convince. But I do think there's those right opportunities, John, with the state. Are there ways that we can mold some of the existing legislation or maybe change a little bit that would conform with some of the ideas and concepts? And again, that discussion just never occurs if those ideas and those concepts don't bubble up and you don't have this kind of a forum to think about and have that thought. Wendy, did you have a thought?
Well, I just wanted to take advantage of your experience. I noticed some of the visions and things you were putting up were from the year 2000 and 2002. And I'm curious about what you consider the expiration date on plans. I know that there's ongoing work, but you've got your master plan. And what is the average life of a plan being efficient and workable? How often do we need to look at the major master plan versus the little bits and pieces of it?
You know, when we do large strategic planning at a state level, you know, typically we're a 3-4 year type of 3 to 5 year, and even within that time, we make it clear that oftentimes you need to zig and zag and what we're pointing, but you know, you go too far, and 20-year plans and 30-year plans are nice, but boy, it sure is difficult to see that far.
So bites of 2 to 3 years.
I think a 3-year because it typically takes a year just to get the momentum in place, and year 2 you're starting to hit on all cylinders, and year 3 you can assess what's working, what's not working, and do we have to rethink some of those. So I think somewhere in that 3, maybe outside 5-year would be the right kind of timeline duration.
Thank you.
Sure.
Going almost back to what you're talking about and touching on SWAT here a little bit earlier, I love the phrase, what was isn't. We've got some unique circumstances here in Estes Park that makes us a little bit of a dichotomy. Perfect example is we've got a brand new state-of-the-art event center, top of the line. On the adverse, which goes back to long-term visioning and revitalization, we've got certain mechanisms that are in place, specifically through requesting permits for updating buildings and doing reconstruction and things like that to keep our buildings up to date. However, if you have a building that was built 75 or 80 years ago and you've never put in a permit, we do not have a mechanism to keep those buildings up to code. And I think that goes towards some of the comments in the SWOT in reference to Estes Park needing to be revitalized, becoming old and dusty, things of that nature. So, you know, we're on the cutting edge in one way, and then we don't have the mechanisms to keep a lot of our buildings and a lot of our codes up to date as well.
Well, and that's you've got to have that foundation there for the development community to be able to act and work on those. And you're certainly in a unique environment where a somewhat older community and having some of those older structures, and is that still relevant with some of the codes and some of the workarounds that are required on that?
It's the work towards the international building code that's being done right now. So there is
I've got a real nuts and bolts question for you.
Okay.
We talked a lot about new product development, less so about the evaluation of existing projects or initiatives. So who does the initiative, who does the assessment of existing projects and does so in a way that doesn't turn those people off, gets them to gravitate toward new things or revitalize what they have done? Because so often those events are hermetically sealed by certain people who have done things this way, that's the way we always have done them, and then we're surprised when the results are less than we want them to be.
And I think, Jim, part of it is, and we'll close out the day talking about sort of next steps, but if there is some type of entity or organization or commission, much of that first year planning process is really trying to think, are there existing products that really could use help? How do we move it?
Reinvigoration.
Right. The other point, though, that you bring up, and that is a cautionary point, if we do form some new entity or some tourism development committee, commission, whatever, there can be some groups that find that threatening. You know, this is my sandbox. What are you doing messing around over here? And so how do we?
And especially in a small community where the sandbox is pretty tight.
Well, and that can be challenging, and I think that's part of the dynamics, that it has to be done sensitively and bringing in the right. What we've spent a fair amount of time on.
Who does that?
Well, typically there is an entity. So I'll use this, just not this is your term, but a tourism development commission, let's say. And so this is a 9, 10 person, 15 person body. And frankly, there's a fair amount of attention focused on, okay, we've got to have the Forest Service there, we've got to have the arts, we've got to have the history and heritage person, we've got to have the wellness representation. So a lot of thought in terms of how do we have the right mix of heads participating in this. And then as we have these discussions of, well, what if we enhanced and reevaluated product X? There's oftentimes somebody on the commission that has some pretty deep understanding within there.
So their charge in part is to approach existing events and offer to help rethink them, improve them?
I would say it's not so much that they're the ones doing it per se, but they're the ones trying to think about what new opportunities are there, and I'm not sure you're...
It's the existing products, because you just can't be adding new products without getting rid of some of the old ones. There are not enough people to do.
And the reality, Jim, sometimes that can be a messy process, where the reality is you've outlived and this is a hard conversation to have, but the more you have sort of the right heads around collectively agreeing that that's the right answer, that's an easier decision to make, and you've got the right heads. But you're right, that can be a difficult discussion and dialogue, and particularly you can have folks who have committed a lot of time and energies and blood, sweat, and tears for a lot of years, and to see their baby go elsewhere is difficult. But I tell you what, go back to that product life cycle. You can stay the course and just keep your blinders on, and then find yourself and really being in trouble. So taking those proactive steps earlier rather than later, I think is the right way to go. Well, I think, Elizabeth, as far as lunch around noon, maybe we take a break, let everyone take a little bit of a breather and restroom break. We reconvene for lunch, and then we'll continue on and put you guys really to work in terms of coming up with some new ideas here as we go forward.
I'd just like to make one comment in response to both conversations.
Excuse me, folks, for just one second. We just one last comment here.
In the conversation that was just going on is, I see that committee as you described perfectly, but there's got to be a couple of things that have to happen. One is everybody has to agree on what they're meeting for. And, and if it is, to look at what's been going on and what needs to happen, because we are a small community and you only have so many volunteers and so much money. But I also see it as what I described in my work world is a disagree and commit. In other words, you have to open up those blinders. You have to, get together as what was said to make sure that you can move on. Otherwise, you'll just be in a spin.
It sure is, and I think what gives me promise is just to see the mix of folks that have been willing to dedicate a full day to this process, and certainly this is going to be a longer ongoing effort and initiative. But there has to be clarity, and we're not just meeting to meet. Where are we ultimately going? And I think that's, we're forming some of that foundation here where we're getting this consensus understanding of what it is we're talking about, why we need, what some of the pitfalls are, and hopefully we can maintain and move some of that momentum forward. Was there one other?
Yes, just a quick comment. I first came here about 36 years ago, and dug a little hole in the ground and put some fish in it and named it Trout Haven. At that time, there was about a 6-week to 8-week summer season. So you guys have come a long way. Don't forget about that. There's a lot of wonderful things that are going on now, and resources that we have are phenomenal. But look at where you came from. We've got a lot of repeat business. We've got families that are coming here that are bringing their grandchildren, and now their grandchildren are bringing their children. We've been doing some things right all along, too.
Well, thank you. I think that's an exactly the right tone to break for lunch and recognize we can spend a fair amount of time talking about what's wrong, or issues, or threats, or challenges, or weaknesses, but circling back and recognizing what we have achieved and the progress that has been made is also extremely, extremely important. And about the perfect note to take a little break and have some sustenance here, a little lunch, and get back at it. So very good. We'll have some lunch, and then we'll reconvene after lunch.
I think